Okay, so for me it's 3 p.m. I do not know what's the time for you, but it's time to start the panel, the Neurodiversity and SDE panel. My name is Sonia. I work for the SDE Weekend team under the Alliance for Self-Directed Education. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm gonna help with the moderation of this panel. I'm also going to take a look at the chat and try my best to bring the questions from the chat through to the panelists. And I'm going to invite the panelists to introduce themselves however they want. And feel free to open your mic and then to pass your energy to someone else.
Hi, I'll start, shall I? I'm Esther and Esther Jones. I live in the UK and I have 3 children. They're 16, 14 and 9. And my 16-year-old is autistic, PDA profile, which is demand avoidant. And so we've been self-directed education, unschooling for about 5 years. Before that, my oldest 2 were in a very alternative school in Spain where we lived at the time, and we took them out when they were about 10, 11, 9 and 10 because it just wasn't really working, and we seemed to be in this loop of what's wrong with my son, sort of a damaging kind of spiral that had him very anxious, it had me anxious, it had the school anxious. And finally, I just thought, no, there's got to be another way. So we just left that, and what we did actually was something a little bit kind of extreme. And we moved to this sort of house in the mountains. We rented it for a while. I stopped my office job. I worked from home instead, and we stayed there for a couple of years, just really being. We just got away from it all, and I thought that I would be very creative and I would help them learn and all these things. And it ended up being 2 years of just unraveling for me. They were great. And I was massively triggered by so many things. And it was just an incredible journey for me to understand actually how children are, how they learn. And for me, particularly my 16-year-old now, under seeing him away from that environment that was sort of pathologizing him, and in an environment where he really came into being and I could see his wholeness. It really just life-changing really for all of us. And we moved back to the UK a couple of years ago, and now my 16-year-old, well, my 14-year-old is in a self-directed education center nearby. My 9-year-old is still very much a homebody, and my 16-year-old does a few days a week at a self-directed learning center, and then he has a kind of hodgepodge of activities that he likes to do, that he's kind of created. So that's kind of where we're at now, and yeah, that's kind of who we are. I'm by profession, really, my career has been in journalism and in writing. And now I host a podcast. I'm fascinated by the parents' journey. I think that the parents' journey is at the heart of all of this. So I interview other parents, and I kind of help parents in that process too. So yeah, so thank you. Delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'll pass it over to one of my co-panelists here. Thank you.
You want to go?
I do not mind.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I'm Lorelei, and I'm 17. Bria just messaged me, and I'd like to, yeah, okay. Sorry, I was L before because I didn't like using that name for stranger panels. But then it wouldn't save when I tried changing it, but that's okay. I'm 17. I was diagnosed with ADHD last year, but recently that's been overturned in favor of primarily autism, that has kind of manifested in very ADHD-like symptoms. I live in Atlanta and I go to Hartwood ALC, which is an Agile Learning Center in Clarkston, neighboring city. And I'm going to be completely honest, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try my best, maybe help some other people out, maybe help myself out. And got some anxiety through the roof right now, but that's okay because I believe in myself, so it's all right.
Thank you.
And I will pass it, yes.
All right, hello everybody. So I'm Crystal. My full name is Crystal Bird Farmer. I'm autistic. I was diagnosed 4 years ago as an adult. My daughter is autistic with ADHD, and I run an ALC called Gastonia Freedom School. And this is in North Carolina in the US. That's where I grew up and where I live now. And our center is specifically for disabled kids. Most of them have autism. And I also wrote a book. I went ahead and put the link in here so I won't forget. I wrote a book about diversity that people seem to enjoy reading and applying to their community. So that's that part of it. So.
Thank you. So we are in this panel of neurodiversity and self-directed education. And as I've seen in my experience and in my research and just visiting other self-directed spaces or talking with people from self-directed spaces, these communities are safe, or are usually considered safe for people that do not feel comfortable in the typical system or in the state system. Doesn't matter where we are from, in which countries. Somehow, a lot of people that do not fit there because of many, many reasons, because they do not like the oppression of it, or they don't feel like accepted by the community, or by their peers or by their teachers. A lot of the people do join self-directed education because of other people, because of the space itself, because you can show up as you are, not necessarily because they don't want to learn this or they do want to learn this. So a lot of times it's happening just because you want to belong. How is it for you to show up in a self-directed space as the person you are? And if I will add an extra plus to this question, how do you show up for those who are not like you, whoever they are, and whatever label someone else give them? How do you show up in spaces for yourself and for the others in your reality?
Okay, I want to answer first because I wasn't diagnosed when I got into SDE. So my first experience was going to ALC Mosaic and then up to Zigzag in Asheville. So being a part of a learning community was my first kind of experience with SDE and me showing up in the ways that I am. And the most obvious thing was my race. And the people in Charlotte are great. I don't know if any of them are here. I love them to death, but sometimes it's really rough being in a majority white space. And that was one of the things that was just like noticeable for me. Like self-directed education comes out of kind of like the liberal progressive people in the US, and they tend to be a little bit blind or unaware of the ways that they can cause harm in a space. And so that was one of the biggest things that I noticed. And when I went with my mom to create our Agile Learning Center, that was something that we really were aware of, was let's create a space that is not just safer for disabled kids, but also Black kids, brown kids, other kinds of marginalized kids, so that they don't have to explain their presence or excuse their behavior when they show up in a space. So.
Feel free just to open your mics, okay? Just take the space, it's yours.
Yeah, I guess since y'all are both parents, it's a different perspective. So my experience personally has been, I was in traditional school, in public traditional school, from kindergarten through 7th grade. And obviously we all know middle school sucks, like 90 8.4% of the time. That's very specific. So it just wasn't working for me. And after a couple little mess ups, we ended up at Heartwood. And I think the pros of SDE for neurodivergent people is that you're just able to use your strengths for the strengths that don't help you anywhere else can help you where it counts most in your adolescence, and actually like be used to propel you forward, as opposed to hindering your growth where they wouldn't, or like having interests that are different, or having specific like hyperfixations and such that are very, it would just suck in traditional school. They can propel you forward in SDE, and I'm talking in circles, so I apologize, but okay.
There's no need. There's no need. The space is yours. Use it as you are comfortable with. Circles are fine.
Thank you. So I mean, that's just my experience, and
okay.
I'll start.
How is for you, Esther? How do you show up for yourself as yourself, and for other people as they are?
Yeah, I guess I would, so on behalf of my son, I guess I'll answer that in that I think the most important thing that I've found is the safety of the space. And I guess that sort of links to what both of you have said, the safety for that individual. How does that space feel for that individual? Is their wholeness, every bit of them, really embraced by that space? And what are the blind spots? So I appreciate you saying that, Crystal, because I think that's a big part of this, is us all seeing those parts of it. But what I've noticed for my son is that his what might be considered, what can be challenges in some respects, are also his strengths, which are his incredible sensitivity to his space. So he will go to a space and he will know, does this space feel good to him or not? And so he can be in a space which I think would be great. It's super welcoming, it's lovely, but he doesn't want to be there. He can't be there because it doesn't feel safe to him. So I think that idea of safety and acceptance is just huge in a self-directed space. So when they went to this very alternative place in Spain, it was very free. They could do what they liked, but he didn't feel safe there. And so he was very anxious, and became, it was a place where he became very aggressive, and it was very difficult for him. So I think showing up also, that means showing up authentically, I think, really, because that really sort of, to me, is everything about this, is we show up as our full selves so that others can show up as their full selves too. We don't show up with an agenda. We show up willing to be ourselves and welcome each other as we are. I'm going to start talking in circles too, Lorelei.
Okay. Yeah, to add on to that, so the facilitators also need to be open to kids showing up as they are. So that sometimes requires us to like be very flexible and just kind of curious about what, when a child shows up in our space, okay, what are they doing and why are they doing it? And, how can we support them?
Yeah.
Safety is kind of like the most important thing for me, at least, because for like in my experience and a lot of my neurodivergent friends' experiences, like you don't feel safe anywhere in your life. So especially for something as crucial as school, being a young person where school is like most of your identity and most of your life, having safe spaces where you can feel like genuinely any sort of person at all that's valued, especially because in traditional school, for example, you're like shoved aside and treated as, not even just different, just like as like a hindrance. I know I already used that word, but treated as a hindrance for the rest of the class. And, that doesn't feel good for anyone. So, and like for me personally, even having, like making people feel safe is all I try to do in my life. So it's important to have that sort of space that is real and genuine. and actually know it, because also a lot of neurodivergent people can like feel the sub feelings, even if you don't recognize the social cues, you can feel the feelings underneath. And if someone's pretending to be, you know, welcoming, but not actually that way, you can feel it like in your core. So at least that's what most of my personal life was. And I think is wonderful and crucial that we have places that are genuinely what they are, and trying to soothe the people that have either been hurt already by systems or have the potential to be hurt with the rest of their lives, the way things are, because they're treated as less than.
Thank you. I grow up as the adult that I am as a person, as a facilitator, without a lot of information about people that are not considered by my culture normal, or we are not even talking about the fact that they are other people, like those who are considered normal, or this is the standard, or we want you to be like this. And I found out sadly that neither in my university I didn't receive a lot of information, and I studied pedagogy and educational sciences. So growing up later on as an adult and growing up professionally as a facilitator, I discovered that representation is not a thing. We don't find diversity in the majority of the medias. We don't find diversity in movies. It's a bit diversity in books, but they are not necessarily present in libraries or in bookstores. So other than TikTok, that for me did amazing things in learning about neurodiversity and neurodivergent people, and other than my own experience with children or teen joining my center, I had no information. How do you extend your learning about neurodiversity? And from this, I will go to the questions in the chat, but I'm curious, how do you learn about yourself, about other people, about neurodiversity, about neurodivergent people, about what is that authentic self that you keep space for? So feel free to answer that, and then the connections will be made with the questions in the chat.
Yeah, I've just used not TikTok, Twitter was the way that I connected, just looking up disability advocates and following them. And in the past, like 2 years, there have been so many books that have come out by autistic people that it's just like, okay, now it's starting, it's moving from like the internet into like published stuff. So I'll put a couple of the titles in the chat, but yeah, so just reading their experiences and reflecting on mine is how I work through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my case, certainly in the unschooled spaces that I kind of move in, or self-directed learning, a huge amount of parents are parents of neurodivergent children, and many neurodivergent parents too. So these are conversations that I think just come up very normally in the day-to-day in this environment. That I admit that sometimes I bump into things beyond this environment. I'm quite shocked by like the way people still talk. So there's an awful lot of work to be done, I think, beyond here. But within this particular space, I find that there's a lot of understanding, or at least curiosity and learning available. That's been my experience.
Yeah. When sorry, I lost it. I was diagnosed with anxiety at 2 months old, and I, at least for my diagnosis kind of journey, so I was diagnosed with anxiety at 2 months old. Funny enough, no one except my mom really thought that was interesting or abnormal until I was around 17, or I was around 15 or 16, and looking at it for myself. So if we're talking about social media, the main way that I started learning about things was through primarily Twitter, which is, you know, not always the best place to get your information, but also there's plenty of genuine people who are actually the same as you around the world. And it's basically like texting with the entire universe, and that can be terrible or it can be wonderful. So I was seeing things that I related to a lot, primarily hyperfixation because of like fan spaces and like things with similar interests. And that prompted me at least to do plenty of extra research. I went to my parents and was like, hey, I think I might have this or this. And it mainly helped me realize how you can still be neurodivergent and not show like the heightened primary symptoms, I guess. And that has everything to do with being born and raised a female, because of the disconnect between specifically autism diagnoses and being raised and presenting as male versus female, if we're going to be binary, and how like more AMAB people are diagnosed at a younger age because they're not necessarily encouraged, but not actively discouraged from being actually themselves, versus how women are made to be quiet. And so for me, I was always a very quiet, very anxious, did excellent in school, but just did horribly everywhere else kind of person. And so at least for me, knowing more about myself has been my entire journey for the last few years. And that's the most important thing, again, for me at least. But I hope that
I'm so happy. I'm really happy you're figuring it out now rather than like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably would have gone a while without it, which is fascinating to think about, because I've always been able to do okay, but not well, you know.
I will connect your answers to another question. I'm going to read it from the chat. It's written by Raj. As a facilitator of an SDE space where many of the kids have never attended school, I sometimes don't recognize a diagnosable neurodiverse kids in our space, and I'm wondering what the approach should be. Should I get better of identifying the signs? Should I be active in trying to get official diagnosis? Should we continue to do our SDE thing where neurodiverse kids kind of find their own way and can show up as themselves? And a similar question from Krista completing, do you find benefits in diagnosis?
Yeah, so I'm very pro diagnosis, and I really do try to understand what the different conditions and disorders are for kids, to understand how to help the parents know what to do. And I think it's important that as a facilitator, you frame it as this is going to help you support your child. Don't frame it as this is a diagnosis and this is what's wrong with them, because parents do not want to hear that something's wrong with them. So it's really, I think it's important because there are kids who fly under the radar where they're just doing okay. But if they had a diagnosis, like my diagnosis is like 20 pages, you know, there's so much information there that helps me know exactly what my deficits are. And then I can ask for support in those specific things. So that's what a kid needs. They need to know, you need to know how you can specifically support them. So I always encourage parents to get a diagnosis if I can see the signs. And there's a whole lots of medical information. The Mayo Clinic is a good example about like what are these symptoms looking like? How do they show up in different children? So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think diagnosis is wonderful. Of course, it's not crucial if you're not able to get diagnosed. You know, self-diagnosis is completely valid and fine and supported. But I think what you were saying, Crystal, is massively important, because most of us, I'll say neurodivergent children, because I of course speak for all neurodivergent children in the world, sarcasm if in case you couldn't tell tones, because I also struggle with that, is that you just grow up and everything feels off, and therefore you feel like there's something just highly wrong with you. So at least for me, feeling validated in that there's not something wrong with you, unless you want to say there is something wrong with you for comedic purposes, and saying that just feeling validated in your experience and not feeling like you're anxious about this for no reason, or like even if you're surrounded by the most welcoming, like your feelings are valid kind of people, it's still important because the way many of our brains work is just on overdrive all the time. I have plenty of friends who are like that, and very much like that myself. And so even if you're aware that a lot of things are, that like your feelings are valid and you feel okay, you still feel wrong, whether you're ostracized generally or not. You're probably ostracizing yourself most of the time. But, well, no, you're ostracizing yourself because of your anxieties. So I think diagnosis is very much helpful for validation, if nothing else. And also, like, if you're struggling with how society and school or whatever is treating you, if you really need to like have a slip of paper and say like, oh, I have this different wiring in order to be able to get out of something that makes you feel terrible, if it's really gotten to that point, like, you know, like, why not have that sort of thing if you're able to afford it, get diagnosed, all of that, hoping you're in welcoming enough spaces you can receive it well. So
we were quite late for the diagnosis. In fact, my son, who's just turned 16, he got it when he was 15. He began it at 13, just before the pandemic. And I think the reason we were so late to it was partly we were in Spain, and the attitude was very much, what's wrong with your child? And I found myself really shying away from that. And I found it very hard to engage with the language around it all. I come from a family with a lot of neurodivergence, not diagnosed, but my father, my brother, there's plenty there. So I was actually very familiar with it, but perhaps in some denial with my child. And it wasn't clear to me where, even with a diagnosis, he would fit. So I think that was part of it. By the time he got his diagnosis, he and I had talked about it so much, and we'd done a lot of research together anyway, that it was sort of, it really just, it just confirmed it to us. We kind of knew it at that point, exactly what it was, and so on. And what's been interesting to me with his diagnosis is that it has been very helpful for me to understand so much more about him, for him to understand about himself. But when you are in self-directed education, so I don't know if there's anybody listening perhaps thinking about maybe taking that leap, is that his neurodivergence and the diagnosis, we could say, have led our learning and our process, and they very much inform the way we live. But in the day-to-day, it's sort of not apparent, because he lives in a way that is entirely coherent for him. I'm not sure if that explains it. If you think if you're in the mainstream, the diagnosis becomes the sort of, it's the everything about that child. But if I asked him to describe himself now, he would probably say, well, like, maybe he might come up with autistic first. He's probably first going to say, I'm a martial artist, or I'm a linguist, or I'm a, right? He's got so many labels, and this is one of them to him. So it's an important one, but it's not his everything. And so it's sort of there underneath everything. And like I said, it informs, but doesn't take over in the way that I was scared it would take over. And perhaps that's why a lot of people shy away from it. Like, that's going to be my child. Here he is. I will sometimes explain to people that he's autistic if I think that that's helpful for them to understand that. So I will say that, but it's not the first thing that I would think of saying about my son. You know, it's there when it's helpful for us all, and for him to learn more about himself, and it certainly absolutely shifted my way of being with him when I understood about the anxiety, when I understood actually what safe meant to him. It meant something entirely different than it did for me. You know, so it's I think it's a very, very valuable process. And as Lorelei said, you can self-diagnosis is where it's very obvious. You know,
I can hear my mom nodding to everything you're saying, by the way.
Hi, Lorelei.
Shout out to her. She's someone.
Right.
Thank you for this. I'm gonna say this only once. This is your space. Take it as you want. You may say no to questions that I'm going to take from the chat. Okay. Keep your boundaries. I do not know them. but you know better. So because you have some specific questions to for some of you, so I'm gonna say some, and you can choose if you answer or not. So there's this question for Esther, but I think you also, Crystal, can address that as a parent. Esther, what ways have you developed to take care of yourself as a parent, as you parent your neurodiverse son? Plus, how do you take care for the other siblings when the firstborn has so many needs? And just a second, there are so many messages in the chat. There's another question that I want to add here. How do parents of Black children, more specifically Black boys, get clear about their child's diagnosis, especially when Black boys are misdiagnosed as a form of discipline? So Lorelei, just wait a bit for this one. But if you have a different type of contribution from a person who is a witness to this type of situations of parenting or whatever, feel free to join.
Shall I answer the first one? Is that okay, Crystal? Yeah, okay. Well, I said before, it's really been my journey. I have, my main sort of tools have been curiosity and I'm mindfulness, just taking that time to be less reactive. I was quite reactive when he was little. I didn't understand. I panicked. I had a lot of voices saying, you're a bad parent, you know, what's going on? And learning to stay calm. He needs me to stay calm. The more anxious he is, the calmer I have to be. And in order to do that, I've become more and more in tune with what I need. And you know, I hold his space. And sometimes in the past, I've had moments of holding, you know, you actually feel the weight of what you're holding and it just is so powerful. You just got to keep holding. And so my question to me is, what do I need to keep holding that space? And as we've gone through the years, it gets easier and easier and easier because, and now, yeah, he probably needs more of my time than his brother, for example, his 14-year-old brother. But it's just, it's a very harmonious relationship. We live together well. And because he can express, he feels safe expressing when something's feeling, you know, things don't boil up like they used to. But sorry, going back to that, the word self-care is massively overused, of course, but whatever it takes for you to feel okay. And it could be, you know, someone else in your life that helps you. It could be long walks, it could be meditating, whatever it is, feed yourself and don't. And I also think that that's really good modeling for your children. You know, I think it's okay to say, I need this, so I'm going to take care of me. And that way I'm here for you. I'd like them to say that in the future. I like them when they get to 40, 50, 60 to say, you know what, I need a walk, or, you know, I'm worth taken care of. Because I think at the end of the day, whatever we want them, if we're saying you're whole, you're worthy, you're this, yeah, well then we must be, right? And so there's this whole piece of work to do in yourself, I think. And it's a work in progress, but certainly the more I have been able to live into myself, my own ability to hold space, ability to reflect, ability to understand my own reactions to him and where they're coming from, which is my own conditioning, the more gentle our relationship has become. Yeah, so that was quite a long answer, but I think that that's what I would say. Oh, hi Ariel, that's lovely. Yeah. So yeah, take care of yourself. Like, you know, you just that's just so important, to be their foundation, particularly if you have a child. Well, this is my experience, which is autism and with demand avoidance, where anxiety is huge. You need to be that, you know, you need to find that in you to be that safe space. And then it's okay to also sometimes get upset, sometimes show that. Yeah. Did that answer? I'm sorry, I'm going to pass over to Crystal because she's got a question there to answer to.
I'm typing so much. So about a diagnosis, like I am pro-diagnosis, but I know Black people, I call it like a cultural memory, right? Of just like the harm that has happened in the healthcare system. So you do have to do like your homework, and that's kind of like the disability mom thing is just like, you're going to be calling every single doctor in the phone book, and you're just going to keep going until somebody looks at your child and says, okay, I think I know what's happening and I'm going to help you. So that's just the work that you have to do. Yeah, it's especially true that a lot of disabled Black kids in the traditional school system kind of get punished for the way that they are. And that doesn't improve in an SDE space unless you have facilitators. Like I think the ALC network, I mean, I guess part of what I've been doing is like helping everybody to understand like how do these behaviors show up in an SDE space. And so facilitators really have to be aware of how they're reacting to different children and how that plays not just into disability, but into race and culture and just the expectations of kids. But at the same time, there are some neurodivergent people who are not a good fit for your space, you know? So you have to really be realistic about what can our space hold? How much attention can I put on this one child? How often am I diving in to settle disagreements and misunderstandings? You know, if this child is going to have a meltdown and react violently, you know, we have a chill room for that. But if they're going to be running through the hall, knocking in, you know, windows and stuff, that's just not acceptable. And we can't support that child, you know, in that space. So that's where you have to be like realistic about things.
Okay, I'm reading one message from the chat and then a question. My 6 years old just asked what this panel is about, and I said, trying to be simple, it's about people whose brains work differently in special ways called neurodiverse. He looks up into my face and then says, I'm neurodiverse, in such a strong way, wise way, as his manner of teaching me what I immediately believed him and probably suspected, but never really consciously dwelt on. Being seen, validated by people is important. And then there's this question for you, Lorelei. How did your parents respond when you brought it to them at 16, 17? Did they respond in a supportive way? What did that look like? If not, what would have wanted them to do differently?
My parents were like, finally. They were, at least my mom was so excited about it. This is what I remember, you know, it was in the middle of, or I mean, it was like right at the beginning of the first hard quarantine. So memory's a little hazy from that because of mental issues. But they were very, at least open to it. And I mean, for me, as I said before, it's so important to me to feel validated and have answers for things, so I think especially being validated by other people who have known me throughout my entire life and have known my struggles, they are, or to know that they have the same feelings, or just make it be known that it hasn't just been me in my head the entire time, has been, or was very exciting actually and helpful. And they were very supportive. We've had some issues with, it feels like I'm just kind of trying to get out of certain things by saying, oh, this is just the way my brain is, you know, I just can't do this sort of thing. Or I'm basically just saying like, I'm trying to get out of things because of my neurodivergence, because my family is primarily neurotypical. So overall, it has been kind of the main part of our relationship recently, but their reaction was highly supportive and wonderful. And I am very, very grateful for that. Even if I was misdiagnosed the first time we tried, you know, it's, and sticking with it and not just saying like, oh, this is it. And because the issues would continue even after we try certain things. So if certain things to help them. So, and even like changing diagnoses and stuff, just knowing that they've stuck with, or actually had my best interests at heart, even when it's really annoying, has been very helpful. And I've seen plenty of kinds of parents on TV or in, just in my life. And I consider myself a pretty intelligent person. And I think that, I don't know, seeing that your parents are actual good people, I think is really interesting and kind of thrilling.
Thank you. I'm gonna say that as a teacher trainer in my country, I'm from Romania, so sorry for the English mistakes. I'm not an English speaker as a first or second language is my third. As a teacher trainer in Romania, I teach teachers how to make educational projects, especially for founding them through Erasmus Plus European funding. Most of the time, they struggle to find the problems that they want to find solutions for. But lately, I keep receiving this, I have too many special kids, they are a problem. Nobody told me this. Nobody told me when I signed up for this that I will have so many, especially autistic kids. We may have educators here that are working in typical education, but want to make it more, to optimize it by learning from SDE. Also, we have facilitator in self-directed spaces. My next question for all of you, what advices would you give to any educator at any level about holding space, being there, making their spaces, doesn't matter how they are, to make them learning spaces, spaces where people can feel safe to learn and play and be themselves and be happy?
Listening. That's really it.
I don't know that those resources exist. There is, for traditional educators, there is a lot of resources about how to deal with whatever term they use for disabled kids. But yeah, no.
A lot of people that are facilitators or educators of some sort that specialize with neurodivergent people are very aware that kids are, not as dumb or as innocent or as underdeveloped as most of the adults in society think they are, or at least the way that rules in schools or business or whatever has kind of made them out to be. But I also know, like, being older, you have that internal, just like, oh, I'm older, I've experienced more, I know better. I have that relationship with a lot of my friends, since most of my friends are younger than me, being in mixed age school. So I've experienced that, and can only like imagine that that applies to adults as well. But I think being especially hyper aware, not in a place where you're ignoring like your own needs and stuff, but being hyper aware, or at least observing most of the kids in your space, if they seem to be struggling with something, or just kind of like are really restless or at a certain point. In self-directed spaces, I know there's usually a connection between the guardians of the students and the facilitators or educators. And so, I think having a co-beneficial relationship, if that's a word, a relationship between the adults in the student's life is massively important and can be really beneficial to anyone, because you're spending a lot of time at school. And sometimes when you're spending a lot of time at school, you end up just isolating at home, or all of the time spent at home is frustrated or crying or really angry and just lashing out at your parents or everyone else in your life. At least that's how I was, because of the stress of masking, of social pressures and anxieties in middle school and elementary school. It's just all of it. I need to learn how to conclude sentences better, so I apologize.
I'll jump in. I think that too, you know, some of this is impossible if you have a class of 30 children. I just think it's, you know, how can you do that? I mean, I think one of the massive benefits of self-directed learning centers or agile learning centers is it tends to be a lot less children per adult educator, facilitator, whatever we call them. And I think that what's really important is just that curiosity in the children and seeing what each child is like. Because of course we can't talk about neurodivergence as though that's one lot of children. So my son, for example, he has to have autonomy. It's essential to him. If someone else is in control of him, that is his panic button, and that will to him feel unsafe. He has to feel like he has control. So that's him. And another child may not feel like that. They have an entirely different set of a way of being. So I think that curiosity and then finding which role, you know, so he, for example, is great in a kind of helper role. He helps out with the younger kids. He thrives in more adult situations now with adults because they're given autonomy. It was terrible for him being 6, being told what to do all the time, fenced in. So of course, it's entirely different to every child, I think, and that's very, very, very difficult. You know, I think we requires a remodeling, a ripping down of the education system and sort of starting again, really, with a lot of creativity and understanding how on earth this can possibly work. So I think it can work in smaller spaces where each child is really, you know, observed as they are. I'm not sure if I think I've lost track of the actual question there. So
No worries.
I want to remind us. Sorry.
No worries. It was the question. It was an invitation for you to give any advices to any type of educator. And in kind of in the same way, Crystal, you already started to answer to this question in the chat. There's a lot. I do not know about the US, but I know for sure that in Europe, there's a lot of talking about the importance of nature in approaching children, especially neurodivergent children. And there was a question, I wonder how and if space in nature might allow for neurodiversity that classroom may not, for more neurodiversity. More recogniting opportunity with our planet that makes way for more curiosity and exploring. You, Crystal, said nature is overrated sometimes. Do you want to verbalize that?
Yeah, so ALC Mosaic's model for the younger kids, which they call Roots, was, you know, it's all nature-based play. They have a huge outdoor space. It's beautiful. They don't have any devices. And that's how Lacey runs that space. When we founded Gastonia Freedom School, we decided to go a different way, probably just because I love technology so much. And I was just like, I'm comfortable with it. And I kind of can understand like how to mitigate some of the risks that may come with like exposure to different materials on the internet and stuff like that. But anyway, so the way we're set up is that all the kids, all the full-time kids have access to a device. They use it most of the time when they want to. There's, you know, a little bit of guidelines around, okay, there's a speaker here, so let's put these away, you know, for a minute. But there's a lot of access, and autistic kids, I mean, this is a stereotype, but autistic kids love devices and they're attracted to that. And part of it is because of that control thing is like, okay, I can control what's coming out of this screen. I can control the sounds. I can watch the same video clip over and over and laugh at it. You know, some people learn to communicate using the AAC, which is like anyway, you push a button and it says a word. So that's a really important support for a lot of autistic kids, and that's why we don't take them away. That's why we make those available. Yes.
I haven't made that connection. I'm so excited to use that against my dad when he says I'm on screens too much. Sorry for interrupting, but thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of progressive parents are worried kind of about like, oh, is it too much screen time and stuff like that? And me, I'm just like, no, you know, these kids are going to grow up in a place where there are screens all over, and the earlier they learn how to navigate those screens and understand how they react to them, the better. So that's kind of where that's where I land on it. And nature is important, and yeah, it's good for them to get outside. And I think sometimes as parents, just like when we're deschooling about, oh, well, are they going to learn to like math or whatever, you know, or are they going to choose to go outside on their own? Well, maybe they won't. I mean, if you've been a screen restrictive family and you suddenly allow screens, it's going to look like they're going crazy and that they, you know, are addicted to a screen. That's just how it happens. That's the transition. But a child who's, you know, is able to regulate her own screen time is going to make much more, they're going to be much more flexible, and they're actually going to choose to go outside every once in a while. They're say, hey, let's go and do this. Or, you know, they might come to you and say, I'm bored, you know, so that's kind of how it works out for most kids. Now, autistic kids are always going to seem like they are looking at screens way too much. So that's just a thing, but I think it works for them.
Yeah, I'd like to just chime in there. Yeah, I agree with Crystal wholeheartedly that we can get a little obsessive about, they've got to get out, they've got to do that. And that deschooling process, a lot of that is when the child says, I don't want to go outside. It's okay, well, you know, what am I, you know, projecting that onto them? And I've seen with ours how we let go really of everything. We let go of all the rules, we let go. It was pretty lenient already, but we just, I learned to stop worrying. And so my son, for example, who, you know, he probably spent 2 years where he really he was gaming. He had almost no social contact. He was still just sort of, whatever he was doing, he was in a process, and I had to trust while he was in that process that he was okay. And now he rarely games. Which isn't to say, oh, good, he rarely games. Sometimes he says, you know, I'm feeling kind of anxious, I'm going to go and game. I can feel I need it, right? And he'll go and he'll game for 3 hours, and poof, and he's got through some great thing. He's feeling great about himself. He needs it. It's how he regulates. And now he's busy all the time, and he's doing all these things, and he's doing martial arts, and he's outside all the time. And, you know, any fear I might have had when he was 13, 14, that this person, oh, he's gaming, all he'll ever do is game, he'll never go outside, it's completely unfounded. You know, he did what he needed to do to get where he is now, which is actually what he was doing then, what he's doing now, which is to understand what he needs. So in that moment, he understood what he needed. I didn't get it, but he did. And now he's doing the same thing. This is what he needs now. And in fact, and I think this is a really interesting point, they don't differentiate. So we say, oh, screens, playing is this. They could just as easily be decide to do a maths problem on a Sunday night as go on a screen, or they might, it's the same. It's what I choose to do in this moment of time. When we don't restrict it, their choices always just make sense to them at that moment. So nature, it's there. I model going for long walks. I swim in the sea. I do all that. And I always say, hey, I'm going for a walk. Would anyone like to come? And every now and again, someone will go, ooh, okay. Mostly not, because that's not what they feel like doing that time. But, you know, the other day I said, oh, I'm going to go to the woods for half an hour. I just want to be in trees. Does anyone want to come? And they all three hopped in the car with me. Well, oh, okay. You know, who knows? And so by not stressing over it, I think we allow that freedom of choice, and we allow them to recognize when that's what they need, without sort of overriding them. Yeah.
Not to say that nature is bad or anything, because I can hear people being like, I not people here necessarily, just people in general being like, oh, you're just, because if I were to say any of this to a neurotypical person that wasn't here specifically because they wanted to listen to neurodivergent people, they'd be like, oh, you're just trying to get away with things and trying to be able to stay up for longer on your devices and do these things and never have to go outside. There's nothing wrong with nature and going outside. That's all jolly and fantastic. I spend plenty of time at school outside, as much as I can when it's not freezing or really hot, because the weather here is awful. But like, it's mixture, you know, it's whatever you want. Really, all I want for neurodivergent people in any sort of space is to be listened to and to feel like they're not, you know, gaslighting themselves into making their own issues, or like, oh, you're not actually. I just want people to be a little more chill with that sort of thing, but be able to help. And that's part of why I value alternative education so much, because some people may just, you know, adore the traditional school system, and that's fine. But like, there are going to be the majority of people, because of just the way people are, that are not going to be able to have any sort of growth or enjoyment in the most crucial years of their lives while they're stuck in a room being talked at. And I'm sure that's what brought all of us to this point. But I just think being listened to and being valued as a person are really just the main things that people, like, if you need to assist someone who's neurodivergent or having a difficult time, or even not having a difficult time, who's just, you know, a little bit different, listen to them. And if you are neurodivergent, just know your value, I guess. I'm not trying to give advice, I'm just, that feels like the general connection. And, you know, caring about your own self-worth and knowing your value as a person is not weird or put down. I do have a bit of a God complex sometimes, but that's just because I'm in my own head so much and knowledgeable about myself. And I think that's actually very common for a lot of hyperactive neurodivergent people who aren't like, don't know where I'm going with that. But I hope that made sense. It made sense to me. But a lot of things that make sense to me make sense to absolutely no one else. So
it made lots of sense. And if you're looking to the chat, you'll see that a lot of people understood you with their hearts, not only with their minds.
Yes, so, I do appreciate that.
To be mindful with the time, we are in our last minutes, and I'm going to invite you either to ask each other questions, like if you, between the panelists, you have questions for each other, or you just want to say how was this panel for you, or some final thoughts. This is it.
Lorelei, I just want to say you are an awesome person, and I really appreciate your voice on this panel. So I hope you continue to speak up and talk about it. Like, you don't have to get on social media or have a blog or anything, but just, you know, just the way that you want to communicate with people is perfectly valid. And I think it's great. And I think people will listen to you.
Yeah, I second that. It's been lovely sharing this space with both of you, and hearing your different views and perspectives. I'd just like to say, yeah, if anyone out there also is unschooling or is in self-directed education, I have a podcast which I always invite people to come on. I love to talk to people. I love to hear about their experiences. So that would be great. And really appreciated seeing in the chat all the different questions. That's just really revealing to see what is on people's minds as well. And so thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just thinking, will you be sharing our details later, or?
We are going to share with you a document, and if you want to share your details, you put them in the document, but you can put them now in the chat if you want, so it's your space.
Okay.
People are asking the name of your podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast is called The Unschooled Space, and it's really just a series of conversations with other parents who may be beginning on the journey, experienced on the journey, whatever, really just about their journey of deschooling. Yeah, and I have a blog as well, which I think is shared there as well, but I'm not going to promote myself anymore.
But you do that.
Yeah, I do that.
From anyone.
I think, oh yeah, well done, Crystal, exactly. Book, the token, right there. Yeah, yeah, Bria's included it all there. Thank you. Lorelei, pass it to you.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for organizing this, for being here in the first place, whether you're part of the panel or just kind of here for whatever. I am also grateful to the people who know me in real life for being here and for texting me throughout and being like, "You're all right, you're doing great," all that. And also to everyone who's said in chat that they are actually understanding what I'm saying, because that's one of my main concerns. I hope the rest of the weekend goes smoothly, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow, where there's going to be a little panel with some other neurodivergent people and one of my friends, neurodivergent children, I'll say, tomorrow morning or something, and I hope I wake up in time for that. Just a lot of appreciation.
Thank you for this. And yes, tomorrow you'll have the chance to explore more about neurodiversity, going a bit deeper in one offering that is more than 1 hour, is 1 hour and a half. You'll see the schedule on our website or in the email that you received, or as you already know, I'm gonna share my screen at the beginning of each day or each session. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Lorelei.